morning, class. Today we're going to learn about animals and their habitats. We're going to discuss the topic, watch a quick video, and do some activities. While I'm writing the lesson on topic on the board, would any of you like to share something that you already know about this topic with the rest of the class? Well, each animal needs a habitat to live. Just like we need a house to live, animals also need a place where they can go and stay warm and safe. A habitat is the natural environment where a plant or animal lives. The animal's habitat will change according to their needs. Every animal needs 4 basic things to live. They need water, food, air, and shelter. Now, the food you eat is probably different than the food that a hippo eats or a crocodile eats. Same with the type of shelter that we have. Different than us, rabbits can use trees and rocks as shelter for them. We actually need a house with a roof and a room to live in. There are also a few things that can vary from animal to animal. For example, while animals need to drink directly from a freshwater source like us, penguins get their water intake from the fish and aquatic organisms they consume. Now we can explore some visuals to learn more about different habitats and which animals live in each habitat. We can start with the desert habitat. This is a good illustration of what a desert can look like. It's very dry. Temperatures are high, the sun is always shining, and it's the vegetation in there is more like more cactus than trees because there's not much water, right? And that's very dry. Sometimes at night it can be a little cold in the desert because of the wind, but it's usually a high temperature place to live. So some examples of animals that can live in there. Who can think of some animals that live in the desert? Under those circumstances, knowing that the weather is hot, knowing there is not as much vegetation. Can anyone think of any animal? Good. I also have some examples here in these pictures. I have some rabbits, lizards, owls, rats, foxes, and even some types of snakes too. Usually these animals try to find shelter by digging a hole in the ground. So that's a good example of animals that can live in the desert. Okay? Any questions here? All right, we can move on. So the next habitat we're going to talk about are the cold habitats, but like freezing cold, very, very cold. Some examples are the North Pole or the Antarctica. Okay? And then we are going to also explore some animals that live in there. If you guys can see close, there's already an animal in there. 2 animals, right? Yeah, these are penguins. Penguins live in very cold weathers. Okay? They have a thick fur that keeps them warm, and they need it to procreate. That's the way they do. So here are other animals that also live in very cold weather. We have the penguins, as we already talked about, but we also have that's right, polar bears. Polar bears live in very cold weathers. We have the Antarctic wolf. We have the snow owl. And you see how interesting it is. The other owl that we looked, the desert owl, it is actually brown, right? It is a brown one. Probably to fit in better with the desert fields and habitat. This one is white. So it's easier for her to hide in the snow and all the ice and white in there. We also have whale. This is a big whale. Her name is beluga whale. So these are good examples of animals that live in the cold weather, okay? Awesome. Moving on, we can talk about some other types of habitats like mountains, okay? This is a good example of how a mountain habitat can look like. They have really high mountains, okay? They have some vegetation, and these are not cactus. We also have sometimes snow in the top of the mountains. If they're really high, they can keep snow all year long. And then here are some examples of animals that live in the mountain. I want to read this to you guys. We have a bighorn sheep. We have a mountain lion, mule deer, moose, black bear, and elk. These are some animals that will live around the mountains habitat. Any questions here? Okay, I think we're good to go. Moving on to a aquatic habitat. Now, who can give me some examples of an aquatic habitat? That is right. We can have oceans, rivers, lakes, or even a pond. Okay? So here I chose the ocean or the sea. And here are some examples of animals that live in there. Who can guess one? Fishes, that's correct. We have fishes in the ocean. Anything else? Good. I love when you guys are participating. So here I have some more examples. I have a whale, a crab, octopus, a fish, right? And a seahorse. These are all good examples of animals that live in aquatic habitat. Wonderful. You guys are doing great. Now we can move on to a different type of habitat. This one is savanna. Not like Savannah, Georgia, right? But this is a type of habitat. We have savanna in Africa, for example. So this is how the savanna looks like. Okay? It's a very vast, big space where animals can hunt, they can feed themselves, they can get water for some streams. All right? And huge, big animals live in this place. Who can guess? That's right, lion is one of those. And I have a big list of animals that I can share with you guys. I have lions, cheetahs, hippopotamus, giraffes, zebras, even elephants. So here are some pictures to illustrate these animals that live in savanna. That's right. And don't worry, I'll pass this material to everyone so that you can look at it closer and work on it, discuss with your neighbor, and then we're gonna move on later to an activity. But for now, you guys can just follow up with me. You're doing great. All right, the last habitat we're gonna talk about today, it's a forest, okay? Now, this picture might not have color, but you can already guess their forest is has very dense vegetation, right? Lots of greens, lots of trees, lots of flowers, and they also have lots of water sources in there. So this is a great place for animals to live, right? They can find shelter in the trees, they can find water in the rivers and the streams. So this is a wonderful place. We have many animals that live in here. Can anyone guess an animal that can live in here? That's right, we definitely have fish, because at this part it's kind of like aquatic habitat in a forest. That's right. We do. We also have birds. Think about it. With that many trees, those are really great places for you to shelter yourself, to reproduce. So yes, we have birds in there. We have some really cool animals in here. We have toucans. All right. Yeah, that's a great picture, isn't it? We have some macaws. We have cockatoo. But we also have other bigger animals. Elephants can also live in here in the forest, not just in the savanna. We also have crocodiles that live here. We even have some dolphins. If you think about forests, I can give you an example of the Amazon forest. We have a river, and then we actually have animals in there. The Amazon River dolphin. They're usually pink. They're not gray like the other dolphins that we usually see at the beach. But these are good examples of animals that live in a forest. Okay? Wonderful. So now that we looked at different habitats, when we talk about habitats and some animals, and we give examples and illustrations for each one, we're going to move on to work on our vocabulary, okay? The first word of our vocabulary is habitat. And what is habitat? Habitat is the natural environment where a plant or animal lives. For example, lions can be found in savannas and grasslands. They require space where they can successfully hunt, hide, and procreate. So that is a perfect space for lions. But would that work for penguins? Certainly not, right? A good use of this word is a sentence could be, giraffes live in the savanna and fishes live in the oceans or rivers. Now, another word that comes to our mind when we are talking about habitat and animals is shelter, right? Because it's one of the 4 basic things that an animal lives to live. It's food, water, air, and shelter. So what is a shelter? A shelter is a place that protects animals from bad weather or danger. For birds, it is a nest on top of the tree. For a bear, it's a cave. For groundhogs or moles, it could be a hole in the ground. Interesting, right? As we talked about, animals will have different needs. They have these 4 basic needs, but even within the basic needs, there are specificities that will change from their needs. An ecosystem is another word that we're going to talk about, okay? An ecosystem is a community of living and non-living things that can interact with each other in the environment. In other words, the ecosystem is the interaction between animals, plants, and their habitat. We have an ecosystem inside a glass ball, as long as we have some things. Living things, non-living things, air, sun, and water. With all these things, it's fascinating how life procreates more life when their basic needs are attended. Is everyone okay up to this point? If you have any questions, you can raise your hands, and we're also going to review this in the end before we wrap up, and I'll give some more instructions about activities. But I think we're doing great. You guys are giving me feedback, and I love it. All right, the next vocabulary is organism. Organism is an individual animal, plant, or single-celled life form. Examples of animals are dogs, cats, giraffes. Can anyone think of examples of plants? That is right. Trees and bamboos are plants. Now, these were probably the easiest ones to think about, right? However, we're still missing some one-celled organisms. Some examples are bacteria and amoeba. Going to another word, species. A species is a group of organisms that can reproduce with each other and create fertile offspring. So if you're thinking that an organism can have babies and it's fruitful, that is considered a species. We have many different species too. Some examples are plants, animals, and bacteria. Even though they're very different, all these organisms can create life in different ways, but they can. Now, moving on to the lesson, it's important for you to understand that animals not only choose or decide to live someplace, they're also capable of adapting, which leads us to our next word. Adaptation is a characteristic or behavior that helps an organism survive in its habitat. The way an animal behaves or has a physical change is considered adaptation. Camouflage is a great example of physical change. Some animals like chameleons, octopus, and foxes can change their skin color or their fur to blend in with the environment. That serves to protect them from other animals that could hurt them. Now, there is also another type of adaptation that we'd like to talk about, which is the behavioral adaptation. That one affects the way animals behave. Migration is a good example of behavioral adaptation. This is when animals move from one place to another in search of food. During cold weather, they can move to a south, like the birds. Many birds travel south to places like Florida and Brazil to get away from the cold weather. Make sure they still have all their sources, the basic needs they have, food, water, shelter, and all that. The next word we're going to talk about is biodiversity. Biodiversity is a variety of different species of plants and animals in a habitat. Pretty simple, right? Now that we have worked through this list of words, it's time to work in small groups to match animals and pictures to the habitat. Just like I did here, I'm going to pass along some material that looks very much like this so you guys can match yourselves a habitat to each animal. Okay? Your job is to work as a group and decide which pairs are the best fit. Now, using the key vocabulary flashcards I gave you in the beginning of class, you have to work about your knowledge about animals and their habitats and write a few sentences and write an illustration. You should work on it individually, but feel free to discuss ideas with your neighbor. There are directions available for you to search each word's definitions. These resources are dictionaries. You can also use a computer to look up definitions. I'm also leaving the PowerPoint open so you guys can check any extra information you might need. This activity requires you to use at least 3 key vocabulary words that we learned today, reading from 3 to 5 sentences, and finish by drawing a picture that represents each sentence. You can also choose to write a story and connect all the sentences. I'll be walking around the class in case you need me, and you can raise your hand and I'll come and help you at your table. Now, before we go to recess, let us review a few points of the lesson. Every animal has a habitat, right? As we learned today, each habitat is a natural environment where plants and animals live. Every living thing is 4 things. Can you guys help me with that? Water, food, air, and shelter. That is right. And now let's think about some quick examples of animals and habitats. A lion. Where does a lion live? That's right, savanna. What about a polar bear? Cold habitats like North Pole. That's correct. Birds. Forests, right? Usually they use trees for shelter. What about a jellyfish? Aquatic habitat. That's correct. And what about us humans? We need an actual house, right? That's right. Good job, everyone. I'm very proud of all the work you guys put in today. Next class, we're going to continue working on animal and habitats, exploring new words and concepts. Thank you.